Hello students, welcome to PW OnlyIAS. I'm here Harpreet Singh with a daily analysis of The Hindu from 2nd of October 2024. Let's begin with today's analysis. First of all, today is the birth anniversary of Gandhiji and Lal Bahadur Shastri ji. So we should get inspired from their teachings and obviously learn from the important contribution that they have made during the freedom struggle and even after that. And we should try to imbibe those values in us and with the same vigor work towards the development of our country. So let's begin with today's analysis. This is the QR code for the Telegram account where basically this PDF or the bold work which I have done would be basically posted. Along with it, a lot of updates and other articles are also posted. So you can subscribe to that through the QR code or the name that is mentioned over here. Let's begin with the topics that we have taken for today's analysis. First, Dalit student and the Article 142 and how this has been exercised by the Honorable Supreme Court. Then, Monetary Policy Committee, Foreign Policy of India. Next is a UPSC selection process. There are certain issues in that which was basically mentioned in today's newspaper. So we'll have to deal with them and analyze them. Let's begin with today's analysis. Okay. Now this is very, very important article. This has been in news for the past few days. Now, what is the basic background of that? Please understand. There was a Dalit student who had qualified the IIT and had to take admission into IIT Dhanbad. Now, what happened is that he had to pay a fees of 17,000 rupees, which the family did not have. So they were not able to submit the fees within that window of the time which the fees had to be deposited. Now, because of that, he could not get admission into IIT. Family, when basically got the money or by borrowing from various people, they got that 17,000 rupees. They called to the authorities that possibly now they can get their student or their child admitted into the respective IIT. They said no, because the window of submission of the fees is over. They went to the High Court. The High Court said it is important that you appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will give the respective judgment. During this judgment, when the case went to the Supreme Court used the Article 142 in order to change the basic provisions that the selection process had, or to be more precise, the admission process had, so that the student, that is a Dalit student, can get admission into the IIT. Now, what is important over here is two things. First, we have already discussed the socio-economic conditions of the Dalit families in India, who basically belong to the scheduled caste, and see the prevalent poverty among them also, that they were not able to gather 17,000 rupees for their child to get admission into the IIT. That is one aspect, which we have already discussed in the previous analysis of the news. Second most important aspect with respect to civil services is also the usage of Article 142 by the Honorable Supreme Court. Now, what is Article 142? What are the various dimensions associated with that? What are the positives? And what are the negatives also of 142 article? We have to do that in this particular discussion. Let's begin the discussion. Complete justice and Article 142. Now, please understand, this can come in your examination, in your preliminary examination, as well as your mains examination. So, understanding the concept of 142 becomes very, very important. Now, see, the idea of complete justice is derived from the Article 142 of the Indian Constitution. That means, what do you mean by complete justice? See, what happens sometimes is that it is quite possible that some legislative action, even a judicial action by the lower court or even by the Supreme Court, or let us say some other wing of the body, or let us say of the government, has taken some action because of which the Supreme Court believes that it is going against the concept of justice. So in order to rectify it, that means that order can be, let us say, a rule or a law passed by the legislature or executive or even by the judiciary or even other bodies under these wings. In order to rectify any wrongdoing that has been done, Supreme Court has a power under 142 that it can revert and deliver justice. That is a very huge power that has been entrusted to in the hands of the Supreme Court. That is why because of some justice that has not been given to an individual, body, or an organization, the Supreme Court under 142 can revert any decision of any court, any, for that matter, legislature or even the executive in order to deliver a justice. That is why in this particular case, when we saw that there was a specific rules laid out with respect to the admission process, because he had already got his seat in the IIT through the competitive examination, but had to admit himself by paying the fees. The rule said there was a particular deadline where the candidate had to submit the fees. He could not. So specific rules could not be changed, but it was by the Supreme Court under Article 142 that an exception was made. That means in order to deliver justice, because a particular candidate who is deserving, but because of that extreme poverty, could not basically get that amount of money. So Supreme Court took an exception and used the concept of Article 142 and delivered a complete justice, so that justice prevails. Now let us see the intricacies that are associated with this particular concept of complete justice, which is basically seen from the Article 142. The idea of complete justice is derived from the Article 142 that is present in the Indian Constitution. Now see, the Supreme Court, in exercise of its jurisdiction, in exercise of its power or jurisdiction, may pass such degree or make such orders, that it can pass any order or decree as necessary for doing complete justice in any case or matter before it. That means any case, any matter that comes in front of it, that even might cross the boundary of so-called separation of power also. Separation of power exists because there are various wings of the government. There is one wing, judicial wing, judiciary, executive and legislature. That this particular article even surpasses that. If a case is before that and the Supreme Court feels that justice has to be delivered because some injustice has been done, it can use this article and deliver or give an order. That is why it is known as a concept of complete justice, which is basically mentioned in Article 142. And let's move ahead and see. It enables the Supreme Court to exercise the executive and the legislative functions in specific scenarios. Now see, we know that separation of power is an important ingredient of our democratic structure. But do you realize that when the Supreme Court said no, this particular candidate should get the admission and exception is being made? That means it is not basically the role of a judiciary to go into those functions, but over here, it has assumed the function of an executive body and delivered the justice. So in these cases, we can see the judiciary itself taking certain functions of the executive or the legislature in certain cases in order to give the concept or abide by the concept of complete justice under Article 142. As we move ahead, it permits the Supreme Court to intervene in matters concerning public interest, human rights, constitutional values, and fundamental rights. See, please understand, it sometimes happens that the Supreme Court is of a view that the executive itself is not performing the duty which is expected of the executive, or the legislature is not performing the duty which is expected of it, and because of that some injustice is being done to the people. In that case also, Supreme Court can use the Article 140 to deliver the concept which is known as the complete justice. Now let us see the various dimensions that are associated with it. See, why this Article 142 power, that is a very huge power that has been entrusted on the shoulders of the Supreme Court. Why? It elevates the Supreme Court as a role of protector of the Constitution. It has to protect the constitutional values. That is why this power has been given. Along with it, ultimate interpreter of the law, even the Constitution also. It is the ultimate interpreter. If it feels that any law that goes against the constitutional values, it can strike it down. So because it is a role of the Supreme Court to be a protector of the Constitution as well as the interpreter of the law, even the Constitution itself, it has to be given this power. That is why the concept of Article 142 was introduced in the Indian Constitution, right? Now let us see what are the various positive impacts through certain examples and also where certain loopholes or problems also do arise. See, What are the positive impacts? Let us say the Supreme Court can address the urgent issue with needs with legislative vacuum. Let us say there have been legislative vacuum where the legislature is not bringing any law and certain issues are prevailing. In that case, the Supreme Court can intervene and say, we are using the Article 142 to deliver the complete justice. Example, cleaning of the Taj Mahal. Now, Taj Mahal, because of the pollution activities, was becoming like corrosion was happening. It was become the color was changing. So the Supreme Court had to intervene. Even release of the under trials Union Carbide case. Now, these were cases where the role of the legislature and executive had to be the major role, but were not being delivered. So what? The Supreme Court intervened and used the Article 142 that this action needs to be done with immediate effect. Like one of the advantages. Second, we see strengthening democracy. Now, we have seen in K.S. Puttaswamy, the Privacy versus the Union of India 2017 established the guidelines for safeguarding the individual privacy. Now, this case itself, what should be the role of, let us say, the legislature and executive and Supreme Court again comes in, that privacy is very, very important. You cannot simply intervene and go against the individual rights, because right to privacy is again a fundamental right, basic component of the fundamental right. So that is why these steps, again, Supreme Court has delivered this particular judgment. Next, we see provides checks and balances. We know in 2014, the Supreme Court cancelled all but the 4 of the 218 coal blocks allocations deemed illegal and arbitrary. In 2014, we said that coal block allocations are cancelled. Why? Because they were seen that arbitrarily the coal blocks have been given to certain people in which certain people would have benefited. So the Supreme Court said this is going against the concept of justice, where equal opportunity should be given to everyone. Let us say proper tendering process should be there, proper allocation via the tender should be there. You cannot favor anybody. So what happens that the Supreme Court used the concept of, or the Article 142 in order to cancel these allocation that was done. Again, that should have been the role of the government, let us say the legislature or the executive, but the Supreme Court had to intervene. Again, promotes equality. The Secretary, the Ministry of Defense versus the Babita Punia case, in which Supreme Court granted permanent commission to the women officers in the Indian Army. Now, this is a very popular case where the women were allowed to be commissioned permanently. Now, you do realize that the Supreme Court felt that there should be an equality with respect to men and women also. Okay, right now, with respect to women being in battlefield is still a matter of debate, but this is with respect to permanent commission. Now, women can be permanently commissioned in various divisions, if not right now in the battlefield or the front areas, but with respect to various other branches. So that is why the Supreme Court had to intervene and said that it is important that justice should prevail. So this article, this judgment came. Then again, there are certain issues also. Please understand. Subjectivity in the definition. Concept of complete justice itself is very subjective. What do you mean by complete justice? Now, this will lead to the discretion of the court and the judges who are delivering the justice. Now, they can say this is justice, or they can give a judgment, they can say this is justice. So it is very subjective in nature. That is why the issue of subjectivity of the concept of complete justice comes. And over that, we already know that the Supreme Court itself is a final interpreter of the Constitution. So the subjectivity even aggravates. Next is unaccountability of the court. Now see, who is the court accountable to in this particular case? No one. Because we know that the court is a final interpreter of the Constitution, the laws, as well as the guardian of the Constitution. So that again creates an issue, because it can, many people open that this power under 142 can be misused by the Supreme Court against the concept of separation of power. Yes, the legislature and the executive have basically said that the Supreme Court should not cross the delicate boundary of the separation of power, where the roles have been defined, where what the judicial functions are, what the legislative functions are, what the executive functions are. And when the judiciary takes up, in let us say various cases, the role of the role of the executive or the legislature, that basically goes against the concept of separation of power. And this is again one of the criticisms of the Article 142. Now, this was a very important article where we saw started with the concept of the admission of the Dalit student. Now, he has got the admission in IIT Dhanbad, and we are very happy for that also. But we should learn what power that Supreme Court used under Article 142. So this is what was here. Now, let's move ahead. Next is Center picks 3 new members for the RBI's rate setting panel. Now, this is basically the panel which is known as the Monetary Policy Committee, MPC. Now, a small article was given here. So we need to know with respect to General Studies 3 also, It can be asked in your preliminary examination. This can be asked. What is the Monetary Policy Committee? What is the composition? So we need to have an idea of what the Monetary Policy Committee is. Let's move ahead. See, the Monetary Policy Committee, the RBI Act of 1934. It is very, very important, right? The RBI Act of 1934 has been amended by the Finance Act of 2016 to provide a statutory and institutionalized framework for the MPC. Now, it has a statutory backing because the Act has been amended to create this particular body, Monetary Policy Committee. Now, under Section 45ZB of the amended RBI Act, the central government is empowered to constitute a 6-member monetary policy committee. So now it is basically a obligation under the law for the central government to constitute a 6-member monetary policy committee. Now let's move ahead. Function. The Monetary Policy Committee is entrusted with the task of fixing the benchmark policy rate, that is the repo rate, required to contain inflation with a specified target level. So now we have certain targets in order to maintain the inflation. So the Monetary Policy Committee would be responsible for setting what the repo rate should be so that the inflation can be controlled. It should not be more or less. It should be within a specified target range. Now this is the role of the Monetary Policy Committee. Now comes the composition, which becomes very important for your preliminary examination also. Now let's see. First is the RBI governor, who is the chairperson of this Monetary Policy Committee. Second, we have the RBI deputy governor, who is in charge of the monetary policy, is also a member of this committee. Third is one official member that is nominated by the RBI board. That means what the RBI board says that this particular person should be the member, he is nominated and he becomes also one of the members of the MPC. 3 members would represent the government of India. Generally, these are the secretaries, which are basically representing the government of India from the Ministry of Finance. So that depends upon the government of India who they're representing. So we see RBI governor, deputy RBI governor who's in charge of the monetary policy. Then we have 1 member who is basically nominated by the RBI board. And there are 3 members who are representing the government of India, right? And the external members who are here hold office for a period of 4 years. So this basically is the composition of the Monetary Policy Committee. Clear? What is the quorum? Quorum means basically the minimum number of people who are required for the functioning to take place, right? For example, if I say there are 100 people and I say, okay, minimum 20 people should be there, then only this functioning can take place. So that is the minimum number that are required for the functioning of a particular body to take place is quorum. So that is 4 members out of the 6 members, right? At least one of whom shall be the governor, and in his absence, the deputy governor, who is the member of the MPC. That means, firstly, 4 members, the quorum. It is mandatory either the governor, RBI governor, or if he's in case due to some exigency not present, then the deputy governor. Out of these, in this case, if either of them is also absent, then the quorum will not be fulfilled and the meeting will not take place. So this is again a very, very important ifs and buts that one should know. The MPC takes decision based on the majority vote. That means it is the majority vote on the basis of which decision is taken. What should be the actual rate of the repo rate? In case of a tie, RBI governor will have a second or the casting vote. See, we have 6 members, right? Out of which RBI governor himself is 1 member. Now realize, assumably, that 3 members vote and 3 members vote in favor of one particular rate. Let us say the monetary repo rate should be increased, or let us say decreased. 3 people say it should be increased. 3 people say the repo rate should be decreased. Let us say 0.5 basis point. Now we realize that there is a tie. In this case, the RBI governor will have a casting vote. That means a deciding vote in what actually should be the policy that is adopted to be carried forward. This is what is the meaning of this particular statement. Let's move ahead. The decision of the MPC would be binding on the RBI. This is again a very, very important factor which can be asked in your prelims, that the decision taken by the MCI may or may not be binding on the RBI. No, it is binding. So these are statements, these extreme statements become very important because UPSC loves picking up those statements and putting in your examination in order to confuse you. Let's move ahead. Now, this becomes very, very important. India does not share Japanese PM view of the Asian NATO, says Jaishankar. Now, we realize that NATO, again, a bloc which is led by the United States and the Western countries in order to counter Russia and the threats that pose to the Western Hemisphere. Japan PM was of the view that we should have a similar structure in Asia also. Now, in order to counter that, the Honorable Minister of External Affairs said that our policy is multi-aligned. That means we believe in the concept of multi-alignment. We cannot be aligned or favoring just one block. Multi-alignment means that you are interacting with various blocks, various bodies, but your decision would be taken based on what suits you or what is beneficial for you. For example, when you are in NATO, you have to abide by the decision of what NATO takes. Whether it might be against your interest or not, that doesn't matter. That is what is the disadvantage of being engaged in favor of one particular blocks or being part of those alliances. While India believes in the concept of multi-alignment, that we are going to align or be in talk with various bodies and various countries, but our decision would be based on what our interests are. That is basically the concept of multi-alignment. Now, please remember, when we studied the foreign policy, we also see the concept of non-alignment. Non-alignment means not aligned with anybody. And that has been basically revamped into non-alignment 2.0, which basically comes out to be multi-alignment. We'll see that. Now, what is important from the perspective of this particular article is, what is then the basic principles, aspects, or thoughts of the India's foreign policy? Let us see the various dimensions of the India's foreign policy. We'll understand them one by one. There are a lot of points that are present here. Let's see. Okay. First, objectives, thoughts, and views of the Indian foreign policy. Secure national interest and ensure inclusive development. Now, this is very important. National interest and the development of the country is the number one agenda. Wherever or whatever be the aspect, the foreign policy has this major objective, that whatever is in the interest of India would be the number one priority, and along with it, the actions that are taken should be inclusive. That means it should be beneficial for all the people of our nation state, that is India. Next is proactive and pragmatic approach. Now, please understand. Over here, two words are used. Sometimes what happens is sometimes in our day-to-day lives also we use a person who is active. Sometimes someone is lazy, right? Someone is lazy, someone is active, then you are proactive. That means quick decision making with respect to what is the need of the hour. That means proactive decision making, immediately responding to the situation is proactiveness. Second is pragmatic. When we study the India's foreign policy, we have seen that we have been under the phases of idealism. Idealism means that which from the philosophical point of view might appear very interesting, but when we come to the ground, we realize that there are a lot of issues. So what is the important thing is being practical in your approach is known as a pragmatic approach. That means proactive, that means quick decision making, and practical decision making with respect to the interest of India is what is again a major aspect or objective of the India's foreign policy. Next is India is opposed to export of ideologies or change of regimes. Now please understand, we have seen aspects of Iraq, we have seen the dimension of Afghanistan, we have seen so many countries where regime changes have been taken place, sponsored by various other countries. India does not believe in this particular principle. India believes that we believe in, let us say, that whatever the country's ideologies are, they have the full right to follow that. We are not here to change regimes or spread our ideologies and impose on some other countries. That is very important aspect, because we do not expect that we need to unnecessarily basically intervene in the affairs of the other countries. That is again against the ideology of India and India's foreign policy. Now that is why this is again a major aspect that we see with India's foreign policy. Next, India does not endorse unilateral sanctions or military sanctions. Now, this becomes very important. Now, please understand. Did you realize that we were studying Russian and Ukraine crisis? I told you that United States has imposed sanctions on Russia. right? Earlier there used to be G8, Russia was just shunted out of it. Then again G7 came up, the concept came out. So that means United States had followed the policy in order to compete with Russia and in order to exclude Russia from the global organizations and bodies in order to isolate it. Now, even when the unilateral sanction, unilateral means one particular country who's in power or a dominant position imposing sanctions on another nations without the consensus of the other countries is known as a unilateral sanction. Now, when US imposed the unilateral sanction on Russia, India said that we have our own strategic relations with Russia and we will carry on with them. That means this is again concept of multi-alignment. Though India has trade with US also and Western countries also, along with it, India has relationship with Russia also, because from Russia we have been exporting oil at a very cheap price, and that has been benefiting India to a great extent. In few days back, we had read the article with respect to Russia pivots to Asia. That is again a follow-up with respect to this particular point that has been mentioned. So India does not believe in unilateral sanction. If certain sanctions have to be imposed, they should be sponsored by the United Nations. In that case also, we have to see whether it is against the interest of India or not, right? Next is interference, no. Intervention, yes. Now this is very, very particular, very important. We will not interfere in the affairs of the various countries, because this basically concern with the domestic affairs. But in case there is some intervention or help required, then India would be happy to help that particular country. You have seen that there were so many issues, like let us say long time ago, Maldives had also faced issue of water crisis. Now, India's naval ship had to go there and give them water supply. So such types of basically interventions are required. Now we will see that Sri Lanka had asked for the intervention by the government of India in case of IPKF, Indian Peacekeeping Force, when there was a conflict of LTTE going on with the Sri Lankan government. At that time, you would be realizing that the Sri Lankan government asked the Rajiv Gandhi government at that time in order to help, right? So we will see that that was basically asked by a particular country, and this intervention would be fine because that is not hurting the domestic affairs of that particular country. So help, need of the hour, India would help. That is basically intervention. That is selective in nature. Interferences, that means we are mingling or jingling with the affairs or the domestic affairs of a particular country. We will not do that. So that is interference, no. Intervention, yes. Next is constructive engagement over aggression. Now, India does not believe in the policy of excessive aggression or aggression against any country. See, we are a major player in the Indian Ocean region. But along with it, it is again the India's responsibility also to have a balance of relations with all. So over here, we have to constructively engage with all the countries, not just be aggressive in nature. When required, yes, but not unnecessary. So that is again a basic principle of the multi-alignment also that we're going to talk about. Next is strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means, yes, we will be in partnership with various groups or various bodies, various countries, but we'll not be in alliances. There's a difference between partnership and alliances. When you are in alliance, you are bound by the decision of that particular alliance, and whether it is against your interest or not, you have to follow them. Like the NATO countries, if there is certain aggression against Russia taking place, all the NATO members have to contribute, because NATO is, let us say, a strategic enemy of Russia, right? The Western countries. Now, there will be various countries who do not want to be involved in that warfare against Russia, but they will have to be because they are in an alliance. Partnership basically over here means that you are going to be involved in constructive dialogue, help required, and various dimensions, whether it is economic and other export-import dimensions, or let us say human-to-human interaction, but not something that you will be bound by. That is what is known as the concept of strategic autonomy. That means you have an ability to take your own independent decisions, and your decisions are your own, not influenced by some alliance or some bloc which is basically imposing decisions on you. You are not, or you're not have to abide by that. That is what strategic autonomy, where partnership, yes, alliances, no. Let's move ahead. Neighborhood first policy. India has been one of those countries where we have said that our neighbors are the most important ingredients for us, and we have to work towards an inclusive development, and our always first priority has to be to help the neighbors in every aspect. Now please remember that our policy has been these, but when we come across countries like Pakistan and all who have been exporters of terrorism, then we have to take exceptions, because those will be violating this another policy, that is India is against terrorism, right? So our always an initiative has been that we have to work towards helping our neighbors in every aspect, but when our certain other countries are going against or working against the interest of India, then we have to have a different approach. Otherwise, India has always been a country who has helped their neighbors from every aspect, whether it is economy, whether it is technology, whether it is grants and aids. Let's move ahead. Diplomacy for development. Now, we realize that when we talk about development or inclusive development, we realize that it can basically, let's the seeds of the development should be spread to the other countries also, let us say neighbors, or let us say far off neighbors like Africa. So we realize that diplomacy plays a very, very important role. Like for example, if we have to develop the northeastern region, now the country of Bangladesh can play a very important role through, let us say, diplomatic channels. We can have trade routes, transportation networks to northeastern region. So development of Northeast associated with, let us say, passage from Bangladesh, that will help for, again, development, and diplomacy is playing role. So diplomacy plays a very, very important role when we talk about development, because of the geographical settings, the countries' shapes and sizes vary, where you can or may depend upon certain other countries. So that is why diplomacy is very, very important. Non-prescriptive development assistance. That means something that has not been prescribed, but India is helping. Now, please understand. This is a follow-up of the policy of neighborhood with respect to neighbors, and also an essential ingredient of the India's ideology. What does it mean? When any other country who is in the time of need, we, though not asked from, but we will be there to help that. You won't believe that when there were few years back before the COVID, there were a lot of floods that took place in Pakistan. India even had Indian Prime Minister even had a telephone call with the Prime Minister of Pakistan and said, we are ready to give you all sort of needs that you need, humanitarian needs, or let us say the medicines, and whatever requirement you need, we'll be there for you. Though they did not say yes, but see again, non-prescriptive, that is not being asked, still India is ready to give development assistance to that particular country. Next is against terrorism and state-sponsored terrorism. That means any country who is basically believing in the concept of terrorism as a state policy, India is going to be against that. That is why, do you realize, when we have cut ties with Pakistan, in spite of the fact of neighborhood first policy, is that this policy is very, very important, because once a particular country is believing in the concept of terrorism and spreading terrorism and going against the development or the interest of India, we have to treat them differently. Next is cultural diplomacy. We realize that we, as a country which is diverse in culture, we respect and honor the diversity of various cultures across the country also. We realize that Indians are now spread to all parts of the country, not only all parts of the world. We realize that we have cultural ties with Southeast Asian nations, we have cultural ties with China, we have cultural ties with even Africa. So we realize that we need to use cultural diplomacy where exchange of cultures take place. So that is basically soft power aspect that we are talking about, where one-to-one, person-to-person interaction, citizen-to-citizen interaction between various countries take place, which basically improves the relations between the nation and also act as the confidence building measures. Next is multi-alignment, as we have talked, that you will not be in favor of one particular bloc or alliance, but aligned to the various countries based on your interest. Next is para-diplomacy. Now, this is a very interesting topic that has come up of late few years back. Para-diplomacy is very important. See, earlier what used to happen is the central government used to be solely responsible with respect to the diplomatic relationships with the other countries. Now, the government came up with the concept that para-diplomacy, let the states itself have their, let us say, bureaucrats or people go to other countries and build their relationship with those other countries where investment can be brought to those particular states. Because see, if the states are going to develop, the whole country as a nation, India, is also going to develop. So they basically expanded the concept of diplomacy, that it should not be a complete role of the central government also. Even the state governments should take a role where their officers should go to the other countries, have ties with those officers of that particular country, try to bring investment and learn the best practices also. That is known as para-diplomacy. Next is 5 principles of nuclear disarmament: no first use, no proliferation or spread, control, no threat, complete disarmament as an ultimate aim. This is the 5 principle of nuclear disarmament. Next is South-South cooperation. That means all the developing countries should cooperate with one another and towards a common goal of going towards in the path of development. So basically, South-South cooperation focuses on the good relationships with the developing countries. Let's move ahead. Panchsheel principle, again, one of the various important aspects. It basically says mutual respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the other state, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in internal affairs of other states, mutual benefit and treating other as equals, peaceful coexistence. This is again a very, very important aspect. Next is non-aligned. That means you're not aligned with, any country. Then non-alignment, NAM 2.0, is multi-alignment. So again, we have already covered this. This is the ingredients of the foreign policy. Now comes a important aspect with respect to the UPSC selection. See, we will be confining to what the article is saying. Now, there are a lot of loopholes and problems that have arisen. This basically has come up after Pooja Khedkar's issue that came into the news. Now, please understand why. Now, in the case of Pooja Khedkar, we realized that she used a fake OBC certificate. We realized that her attempts were exhausted and that was possibly her 12th attempt that she was giving. Along with it, the third issue that comes up is she used the disability certificate also, misused. That means her disability was close to 7%, though the UPSC criteria is 40%. So that was also a major issue. Now, the problem over here is that one candidate is trying to misuse or do fraud. How is it that UPSC was not able to catch that loophole? It was only after when we realized that certain red beacon lights on an Audi car that came in front, that certain photographs were clicked, and after that some investigation was done, and then we realized that there were certain issues in with respect to the fraud that had happened. Otherwise, possibly it will happen that many other people would have done and they are still in the service. This has to be thoroughly investigated. It was what is the basic article concerns or confines to. Now, please understand. It is time to fix the UPSC selection process. This is with respect to the back-end things that UPSC needs to be careful about. Now, see, in the introductory passage, it says that UPSC issue, the Pooja Khedkar case has basically dented the image of UPSC, because UPSC is one body which has always known to conduct examinations on time, maintain the quality standards, maintain the high level of excellence. But when this particular case came up, it basically thought, how is it possible that this happened? Has it happened in the past also or not? Then these things started coming up. That is why they say that it is important to restore the image of this central body or the constitutional body, which is very important because it is entrusted with the task of selection of the bureaucrats for the nation. Next is, there are loopholes. Now, please understand. We realize that OBC and EWS certificates are issued by the tehsildars. And we realize that SC/ST certificates are basically, when we see issues are there. Now, what we have seen in this particular article is that various cases have come that people have basically used fake SC and ST certificates. Now, it is relatively easier to catch that. But in case of the OBC and the EWS, it becomes very difficult because income itself as a criteria can be misused easily by the people. One of the cases, for example, a particular person whose father and he, let us say, own a property. Now they transfer their property to, let us say, a daughter who is married and get the property registered in their daughter's name. Now they themselves can show that they are very poor and they are basically residing in the house of their daughter on whose name the property has been registered right now. And the student or the candidate can use a EWS criteria and basically get into the service easily. So now we need to see, there are many people using and misusing these loopholes over there, and they are basically applying EWS certificates, or even with respect to income also, OBC certificate can be basically used there. We have seen cases where husband and wife possibly are getting divorced on paper to show that their child does not own anything. So various things have coming up. So these things need to have a proper background check where we see that Tehsildar issuing the EWS or the OBC is not that thoroughly investigated. Even when the certificate during the time of interview you submit your certificates, there are certain investigation done, but then again that means certain loopholes with respect to the investigation that is done. Now as we move ahead, we realize that with respect to income, as we have talked about, there loopholes are there. Now person might leave his or her job. Now for example, an IAS officer is there whose salary might be, let us say, some X amount. Now he resigns from the service just so that his child right now wants to appear and use basically, let us say, an OBC certificate. Now these things are also being done. That is why the Supreme Court is repeatedly raising its concern with respect to the misuse of the reservation that has been done. As we move ahead, we realize that issue of scrutiny comes in. How is it that the background check with respect to UPSC that it has to do is not being done properly? Now that lack of scrutiny and in-depth scrutiny is creating an issue. You would have realized that few years back, one of the IPS officers who was reappearing for the examination was using some earphones and a camera was embedded in his shirt's button. And later IB came and basically caught him. That means they were basically tracking that particular person. Okay, that was caught. Now realize that possibly many other people might be doing. Now they have those jammers in every room. Okay, that was a positive step ahead. But this is a major scam that is at the admin side that is taking place, that basically hurting the selection process and the right candidates not getting inside. Next over here is number of attempts. We realized that in the Pooja Khetkar case also, the attempts were 12. Now she had changed her name, father's name also, and let us say the photo cannot be changed to a great extent. When we talk about artificial intelligence, how is it that the photos are not being scanned or checked properly? Artificial intelligence softwares can be used because see, AI softwares are now good enough. Even if you change your hairstyle or let us say put a glasses and all, they can still trace whether the photo is yours or not. So that should be also used over here in order to check them. If the names have been checked, if certain similarities come, they can be cross-checked. Why were they not checked? That also is being mentioned in this particular article. Next is purpose, let us see disability. Yeah. With respect to disability, again an issue. Under the norms of the civil services, whenever you have given your mains examination and you are called for the interview, before the one day before the interview, generally you go for medical test, or one day after also, depending upon the scenario, you are generally referred to a government hospital. In this particular case, she went to a private hospital, got a checkup done and submitted a file. How is it that those reports with respect to the disability were accepted? Now that basically creates an issue with respect to the people who might be concerned with respect to various particular people who are accepting the reports, and various levels of people might be involved in this. So that again raises a aspect with respect to lack of proper scrutiny. Next is purpose of civil service. Please remember, if you are preparing for civil services in order to get or do malified intention, then in one day or the other, something bad or aspect will come in front of you. That is why we need to understand that civil services stands for serving your nation and the people who are there. If you have malified intention, it would definitely create ripples of bad effects for you also. So this is what was the discussion from the editorial. Please understand, there are certain questions that I have for you. You can just attempt them and put the answers in your comment box. Pause the screen, see the question, write the answer. Pause the screen, see the question, write the answer. Pause the screen, see the question, write the answer. Pause the screen, see the question, write the answer. Pause the screen, see the question, write the answer. And these are the answers that have been there, right? Okay. Coming back to the first, this was the current affair analysis from today. I guess you liked the various dimensions that have been covered today, along with the questions. Please try to attempt these questions and hopefully you learn something. Take care, goodbye, and happy Gandhi Jayanti, along with it, Shastri Ji's birthday also. It is a great moment for us. We should be proud of these very intellectual people who have contributed tremendously towards the freedom struggle and even after that. God bless you, take care, and Jai Hind.